Vanakkam. When a patient presents with a radial nerve palsy, the diagnosis may be quite obvious, but we need to do a thorough clinical examination and then order relevant investigations so that we can completely understand the injury and then make a decision regarding the management. This video is all about these relevant investigations. What investigations to order, how to interpret the results of these investigations that we have ordered, and what is the significance of these investigations. In general, the history will tell us the gravity of the injury. The clinical examination will give us an idea about the level of the injury, and the investigations will tell us the nature of the injury and the status of the recovery, if any. We have seen the evaluation of the history and clinical examination in another video, the link which is provided at the top of this video. However, we shall consider a synopsis of what can be gleaned from the history and clinical examination that is going to affect the process of decision making. Lesions of the radial nerve above the level of the spiral groove are often referred to as very high radial nerve palsy. The lesions affecting the posterior cord or the radial nerve are uncommon in this area, but compression by crutches of the nerve against the humerus or muscles of the axilla, missile injuries, shoulder dislocation, or proximal humeral fracture can occur. In such a situation, there is a weakness of all the radial nerve innervated muscles, most prominently a wrist drop, the loss of triceps and brachioradialis reflexes, and loss of sensation along the posterior aspect of the arm. As far as radial nerve injuries in the arm are concerned, they are the most common causes. There are two areas where the radial nerve is in direct contact with the humeral bone without any interposing muscle or facial tissue, that is, the distal third and the mid shaft of the humerus. Fractures, compression by tendinous fibers of the lateral head of the triceps, and tourniquets are the commonest causes of radial nerve palsy in the level of the arm. Lesions at this level usually present with wrist and finger drop, and lesions at the spiral groove tend to have a weakness of all the radial innervated muscles except for elbow extension and sensation on the posterior aspect of the arm, which will be preserved. Lesions distal to the spiral groove, that is above the elbow, may spare the brachioradialis or the extensor carpi radialis longus muscles also. At the level of the elbow, the involvement of the radial nerve at the radial tunnel should be considered. The radial tunnel is located anterior to the proximal radius, after the radial capitulum, and before the posterior interosseous nerve travels below the superficial portion of the supinator muscle at the arcade of Frost. The radial tunnel syndrome is associated with chronic pain without any significant motor deficits, as the posterior interosseous nerve is spared. This is in contrast to the posterior interosseous nerve syndrome, where typically supination and sensation are spared. This may affect the wrist extension also if the ECRB muscle receives innervation from this branch of the radial nerve. The wrist deviates radially, especially when forming a fist or extending the wrist. Some patients with non-traumatic posterior interosseous nerve neuropathy may complain of pain when there is an injury to the sensory fibers of the posterior interosseous nerve that innervate the ligaments of the radiocarpal, intercarpal and carpometacarpal joints. Lesions at the elbow mainly affect the muscles innervated by the posterior interosseous nerve. Examples of injuries causing this sort of lesion are the fractures of the proximal radius, mid-arm fractures of the radius or ulna, iatrogenic injury during repair of such fractures, and arthroscopic elbow procedures. A tardy posterior interosseous nerve neuropathy can also occur after unreduced radial head dislocation and proximal ulnar fractures. When there is an involvement of only the superficial branch of the radial nerve, it causes a pure sensory syndrome known as chiralgia paresthetica, or the Wattenberg syndrome. Traumatic lacerations or contusions, crush or twisting injuries of the wrist or forearm, compressive lesions secondary to repetitive occupational pronation supination movements, wristwatch bands, casts or even handcuffs can cause this lesion. Patients describe pain or burning over the sensory area of the superficial branch of the radial nerve centered around the anatomic snuff box. The most useful investigations that can be done in a case of radial nerve palsy or injury are plain radiographs, ultrasound, magnetic resonance imaging, and neuroelectrical studies. X-ray of the arm to evaluate the fracture of the humerus, either a fracture of the midshaft or a spiral fracture of the lower third known as the Holstein-Lewis fracture, both of which can injure the radial nerve. The ultrasound is an effective diagnostic tool in evaluating radial nerve injuries in the setting of humeral shaft fractures, and they can aid in clinical decision making by differentiating between patients with nerve laceration or entrapment. So they can be used for lesions of the radial nerve at the arm or the elbow. For this purpose, 6 to 15 MHz high-resolution multi-frequency linear transducer by a musculoskeletal trained radiologist is ideal. The normal appearance of the radial nerves on short-axis ultrasound is stippled honeycomb appearance, showing hypoechoic areas representing the nerve fascicles and surrounding hyperechoic rims representing the endo, peri, and the epineurium. The use of ultrasound at the level of the arm can show completely transected nerves which are represented by focal hypoechoic bulbous thickening at their ends consistent with stump neuromas, or partially severed nerves which appear hypoechoic and irregular, or intact but contused appearing hypoechoic, heterogeneous and thickened, or entrapped in the fracture line when they appear to dive into the fracture site. This image of an ultrasound done at the level of the arm in a patient with a fracture of the humerus shows an intact radial nerve superficial to the humeral shaft fracture site consistent with neuropraxia, and this image shows radial nerve entrapment at the fracture site with partial laceration. In lesions at the level of the elbow, ultrasound can distinguish the nerve from the surrounding tissues, can demonstrate nerve morphology and dimensions, and can identify the underlying etiology like gangliosis, mass, tumor, entrapment from surrounding tissues or vascular structures. At this level, two prominent groups of fascicles are seen within the radial nerve, and the lateral group will become the deep branch of the radial nerve and the medial fascicles become the superficial branch. This can be identified by ultrasound at this level. The MRI is also a useful tool as it is sensitive to the muscle edema, atrophy, and fatty infiltration which accompany nerve entrapment. It depicts the distribution of muscle involvement for localizing the level of entrapment. It can also detect other causes of entrapment including tumors, ganglia, radiocapitellar synovitis, and bicipital bursitis. This image shows the MRI findings in a case of posterior interosseous nerve syndrome. Axial T2 weighted images show denervation edema in the posterior aspect of the supinator muscle, the EDC muscle, and the ECRB muscle, whereas the MRI in a patient with a radial tunnel syndrome shows a mass displacing the radial nerve at the level of the radial tunnel. Finally, we come to the important mode of electrodiagnostic testing for radial nerve injuries. Electrodiagnostic testing is like extension of the neurological examination to confirm a radial nerve lesion, to localize the area of injury, and to follow the reinnervation pattern when it occurs. There are three components to the nerve conduction studies: radial motor nerve conduction studies, the MNCS, the radial sensory nerve conduction studies, the SNCS, and the needle electromyography EMG studies of relevant muscles. Motor nerve conduction studies help to identify demyelinating lesions in the spiral groove. To do so, the active electrode E1 is placed over the belly of the extensor indicis proprius muscle 3 to 4 finger breadths proximal to the distal ulna. To record at this active electrode, there are 3 or 4 stimulation sites. The first stimulation site can be in the forearm, 4 to 5 centimeters proximal to the E1 electrode over the lateral aspect of the ulna with the hand pronated. The second stimulating site can be at the site of the elbow between the brachioradialis and biceps tendons. Another stimulation site can be below the spiral groove at the lower third of the posterolateral aspect of the humerus, and the most proximal stimulation site can be above the spiral groove, that is above the upper third of the posterior humerus. The significance of the motor nerve conduction studies is that Neuropraxia can be identified by stimulation proximal to the spiral groove to detect a conduction block. This is characterized by a decrease in the compound motor action potential and typically occurs between 5 and 7 days after an insult. To reiterate this finding, in a case series of 21 patients with non-traumatic compression-related radial neuropathy at the spiral groove, radial motor nerve conduction studies were performed 7 days or later. It was noted that 10% had reduced distal radial compound motor action potential amplitude. 60% of the patients had conduction block or reduced conduction velocity in the spiral groove. Clinical follow-up showed complete recovery in all the patients. Similarly, in another case series of 33 patients with traumatic radial neuropathies, absence of radial compound motor action potential was associated with only 65% partial or full recovery, whereas presence of a radial CMAP was associated with 85% partial or full recovery. The sensory nerve conduction studies are done just to assess the superficial branch of the radial nerve. It is recorded at the anatomic snuff box with stimulation 10 centimeters proximally at the lateral border of the forearm along the radius. So these studies can only document abnormalities in that region. The study may be normal in proximal demyelinating lesions in approximately 75 to 80%. Lastly, we have the important needle EMG studies. Muscles typically studied during the needle EMG include from proximal to distal, the triceps brachii, the brachioradialis, extensor carpi radialis, longus and brevis, extensor digitorum communis, extensor carpi ulnaris and the extensor indicis proprius. Distinction between axonal and demyelinating injuries may be best made approximately 4 weeks after the initial injury. Since traumatic cases usually involve the radial nerve at the level of the spiral groove, assessing the recruitment in the EMG examination of the brachioradialis may be the most predictive of recovery, as it is the first muscle to get innervated when reinnervation proceeds. In one study, only 33% of patients with absent recruitment had good outcomes, whereas 67% of patients with discrete recruitment had good outcomes and 92% of patients with full or central recruitment had good outcomes. So as far as nerve conduction studies of the radial nerve are concerned, in radial tunnel syndrome, all tests will be within normal limits. In posterior interosseous nerve syndrome, nerve conduction studies and EMG usually yield abnormal results and help determine the site of compression. It may not become abnormal for 3 to 6 weeks after injury. In fact, we can be very specific. If the medial nerve of the posterior interosseous nerve is compressed, EMG and conduction studies will show abnormal function of the ECU, EDC and the EDM muscles. Whereas, if the lateral branch is compressed, abnormal function of the abductor pollicis longus, EPL, EPB and the extensor indicis proprius can be detected. The use of the EMG is mainly for radial nerve injuries in the middle and distal third of the humerus. It helps to locate the site of injury and monitor the nerve recovery over time. It may not be positive for 3 to 6 weeks following injury. By 4 months after the injury, nerve recovery should be demonstrable. I hope you liked the video. I enjoyed making it. Click on the following links to see more about nerve repair, reconstruction and the basics of the radial nerve. And do not forget to subscribe to keep connected with the latest in learning hand surgery.